Welcome to the Mind Vine podcast, where we challenge the stigma associated with mental illness through conversations about a variety of issues impacting mental health. Here we bring you news, views, and interviews that intrigue, educate, and celebrate recovery. Leading us on this journey are the hosts of the Mind Vine podcast, Darryl Mathers and Chris Bovey.
So welcome to the Mind Vine podcast. We've been doing a series of episodes while we're here at the CAMIMH Mental Health Champions Award here at the Shaw Centre in Ottawa. We don't go on the road a lot. This is usually once a year we go to a conference, and this is the place we chose this year. It's been a great event. My name is Darryl Mathers. I usually have my co-host Chris Bovey, but he's out doing something. But I have a couple great guests. We've got Brian Rose, who's closely tied to Ontario Shores. He's a forensic patient at one point in his life, peer support worker, and a face of mental illness for CAMIMH, which we'll talk about a bit later. So welcome, Brian. And we have Fred Phelps, who's the CAMIMH CAMIMH campaign chair for 2018. And so welcome to you, Fred, as well.
So glad you decided to take your second trip out here.
Yeah, it's been great. It's been a great night. As I mentioned earlier, it's a lot of fun to be around so many people that are so passionate about mental health, and a lot of great conversations today. And one of the ones I wanted to have is Brian here is a member of your Faces campaign. That's I guess this is kind of his last official maybe event.
Well, we still got him for a little while, but this is one of his last major events as a 2017 Face of Mental Illness.
So it's kind of like the end of the Miss America.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I don't know if viewers can see him, but he ain't no Miss America, but he's a super good guy.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about the Faces campaign and about Brian's and the role of his colleagues in the campaign?
Well, for the Canadian Alliance Mental Illness Mental Health, FACE has been going on for a long time, and we have a great alumni list of people that are faces of mental illness. But when we began FACES, stigma, mental illness, and mental health was a very big deal, and we choose about 5 people each year to be a face of mental illness, and it takes a bold person to step into those shoes to present themselves to the public, Canadian public, to parliamentarians, to decision makers, to advance the issues of mental health on a national level. And we have a proud alumni base, and Brian is a current face, and he'll be a proud alumni after this year. It's phenomenal. I think the faces have been, over the years, have really moved mental health forward on the national level. And I think the discussions we're having with parliamentarians, the funding that's happening, a national mental health strategy, even the establishment of Mental Health Commission of Canada, a lot of those can be drawn back to the faces of mental illness that have stepped forward and really have put their face forward, but more importantly, their story forward, and normalizing not just depression and anxiety and those are major mental health issues people deal with. But putting forward schizophrenia, bipolar, the major mental illnesses that sometimes are sidelined and don't come into the forefront of dialogue, in the forefront of community. We set those people aside. We set those people aside, and people like Brian have said, we don't need to be aside. We need to be front and center, and bringing mental health really in power when it comes to physical health, and that's a big deal in Canada.
Well, from your experience, Brian, participating in the campaign this year with 4 other people that I think you now consider friends, what's your experience been like? What have you guys been doing? What kind of events have you been attending? That kind of thing.
It's been an amazing experience. I've filmed a public service announcement in Toronto with CAMIMH. I've also been on Parliament Hill with CAMIMH to advocate for the Mental Health Parity Act, more research and more funding. I've also done speeches on my own through universities and colleges to bring up that awareness, to talk about schizophrenia, talk about some complex mental illnesses that are very difficult to talk about sometimes, and my story.
Well, we're quite familiar with your story. We being Ontario Shores, you came through the forensic mental health system, and it's an unfortunate story where you got help because of tragedy that struck in your life. And I think we're all proud of how you have come through recovery and how you've chosen to live your life in recovery by being a face, not just before this campaign, but long before the campaign, of being that face of recovery for people with complex mental illness. And I wonder, Fred, from your perspective, because you mentioned kind of that next level of awareness that we need to get to, Brian's story, as somebody who knows Brian and knows the story, I mean, I have empathy, I have understanding, and all you have to do is talk to Brian for a few minutes, and you're like, I understand complex mental illness a little bit better, but as a public consciousness, we're not quite there. So I wonder, when you see an application for somebody like Brian to join your campaign, is it, I don't know, a little more conversation maybe around that selection than previous years just because of the circumstances, or how does that process
I don't know if there's more conversation. I think I think you're speaking directly about not criminally responsible due to mental disorder, just for audience to understand.
Yes.
And for many Canadians, there's an empathy and understanding when it comes to mental health. But the connection to understanding that mental illness is such that people aren't responsible when they're the throes of mental illness and untreated, or not having access to the services where they may commit a criminal act that they're not responsible for, and that's a big thing for the public to wrap their heads around. I think Brian's story really resonated with the selection committee of CAMIMH. We get nominations from all across Canada, and I think it really spoke to people. And his recovery was evident in his application, and in his interview was evident that he was ready to speak to Canada, and he was the right person for the right face to bring not criminally responsible due to mental disorder into the mainstream. And I think you hear way too often the negative stories that come to mental illness and mental health. We often hear the negative stories and we don't hear the positive stories. And his road to recovery and his ongoing recovery is a positive story. I would probably say it this way. Someone has a heart attack and veers off the road and kills a few people in a car accident. We don't hold that person accountable to that because it's a physical illness. But in some ways, we can't wrap our heads around not holding accountable people directly for their actions in the throes of a mental illness, in a psychotic episode or a manic depressive episode. We don't hold people. We want to hold those people accountable. Very different to what we want to hold people accountable that may have had a physical piece. And so I don't know. I'm very proud that CAMIMH took the step, because it was a bold step. There are political forces out there that don't really see not criminally responsible due to mental disorder. They want to advance mental illness and mental health, but they don't want to advance the recognition that people won't be held criminally responsible if they're truly experiencing mental illness. And I think that story needs to be told. And Brian was the right person and strong enough in his recovery. And that was a very key piece for us. Strong enough in his recovery and have insight and ready to tell a story.
Well, I think I mentioned it to you earlier. I commend CAMIMH for taking that bold step, because it's one that needs to be taken. We need to do more of it. I was, obviously commend Brian for being at the center of it and sharing his story. But the truth of the matter is, people with schizophrenia and other complex mental illness, and maybe who go down that NCR road, there was probably a moment in their life where we could have helped them.
Yeah.
There was probably several moments, and I know Brian's story quite well, and it's very similar. And maybe Brian sharing his story and the route to his recovery maybe helps another person who's going down that road.
We have public campaigns on cancer, public campaigns on diabetes, public campaigns on think of breast cancer. Even 20 years ago, a lot of people that experienced breast cancer had to live with that internally. They within their families. They couldn't be proud to say, I have breast cancer. It had stigma attached to it, right? Yeah. And it had stigma attached to it that didn't allow people to be I don't want to say proud, but I have breast cancer. I don't have nothing to hide about that. I have nothing to hide about that. It's a disease. And mental health, I think, is coming to that point where something like breast cancer was 20 years ago. We're just coming to that point of going, you know what? I have schizophrenia. I need access to treatment. And if I don't have access to treatment, I need organizations like CAMIMH pushing hard to ensure the federal government makes mental health on par with physical health. I need organizations on the provincial level pushing provincial governments to make mental health, fund mental health. Access to mental health services is crucial to ensuring people have lead balanced lives and recovery. I mean, that's literally it. I mean, yeah. So I think Brian's story at different times in his life, he sought services, had services, and other times when he didn't have access to services, right? And so, I don't know. I don't want to speak for you, Brian. I've been talking a lot here.
I definitely fell through the cracks of the system, but to give back and to save lives now is so amazing to me. If I could affect one person just by sharing my story, it's worth telling. Yeah. And that's the platform that CAMIMH gave me, so I'm very thankful for CAMIMH to give me this opportunity. But funding has to go back to government and things like that. Mental Health Parity Act, what we advocated for, and all that good stuff. So.
Yeah.
What's the journey been like for you, Brian? You don't just get to a stage in recovery and say, I'm going to bare my soul with essentially the world, right? You Google Brian Rose now and schizophrenia, and I'm guaranteeing you're one of the top 4 search results. And that's not easy to do. So what's it been like for you? What's that process been like in getting to the point where we first talked about your journey to now you were doing national interviews and part of a national campaign? What's that been like?
I've had to really make sure my wellness tools were a go-to, looking after myself and going for long runs and things like that, showers, looking after myself. And it's been tough at times when I get negative feedback, but when I get positive ones, it's worth it. It was a good year. I had a lot of opportunity, a lot of doors opened up for me, and I'm very thankful for CAMIMH.
What's the relationship been like with the other faces? I know I've seen you a couple of times in the last year with other members of the Faces campaign, and it seems like there's a little camaraderie. You got, I guess, is there an inherent understanding of each other, even though your roads might be different and what you're dealing with is different, but it seems like you guys have a lot of similarities to draw from.
Yes, we did a filming in Toronto, a public service announcement, and we really had time to get to know each other and bond, and it was an excellent journey, and now when we see each other, we're like friends, so it's really good, and it's important.
Fred, back to the campaign. There'll be another one coming up I know the nomination period is closing in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, in June.
You'll be making an announcement sometime in the summer. Maybe not specific to Brian's situation, but where do you see, if it's not next year or the year after or sometime in the near future, that we need to go with the campaign to push limits? Like, is there another area or topic, or is it much the same that we have to keep driving?
I don't think it's always pushing limits. I think it's promoting faces, and I think there's always a pushing in the sense of acceptance of different levels of mental illness, right? And so I think society is getting to a point where mental health issues, depression, anxiety, are becoming more and more acceptable. But I think also the stronger mental illnesses that really affect and in some ways really affect people's lives and really change who they are when they're in the throes of that is difficult for people to understand. And so I think promoting people that have major mental illness disorders and ensuring that they are able to present their face, and that recovery. We live in a society where we're told all the time that happiness and everything is where everything needs to be happy. You have to I don't know, not always be happy, but I think the realization that happiness is, you don't always have to be happy. It's okay to not be healthy, and healthy physically, healthy mentally, and to seek treatment and to work to be a better self. And I really think we just got to keep on pushing the fact that mental health itself needs to be treated on par with physical health, and that keeping that dialogue going and pushing that forward. I think I envision 20 years from now, mental health being where breast cancer was 10, 15 years before. That came with a lot of work, with a lot of work, and events like tonight where we celebrated champions, faces. They keep on pushing those forward. And I think if you looked at the dialogue around individuals from, say, 2000 to 2017 that were faces, and their experience from 2000 to the experience of 2017, I think you see the growth of where and how both governments, individuals, and communities treat people with mental illness and mental health.
Yeah, it's remarkable when you think about it. I think sometimes we focus on where we need to go, which we
you got to focus. Right? You got to focus ahead.
Sure,
but you got to look backwards.
But when I think about when I first got into mental health in 2006, where we were then, scouring the newspaper, trying to find anything positive about mental
positive.
health. And
we're not far away from housing people completely away from community that were experiencing mental illness and mental health. We're not that far away. And so we have to keep that in mind, and that momentum, we got to keep on pushing. And to be able in 2017 to put forward an individual, NCR individual as a face of mental health and mental illness, 2000, I don't think that was possible.
Yeah. No,
we're advancing that conversation.
I wasn't sure it was possible in 2017, to be honest. Full disclosure, I'm the one who nominated Brian. And because of his work with our hospital, we've seen him grow and share his story. And, I thought maybe, the timing was right. And, I mean, certainly the person was right. I knew that. But you don't know.
Obviously, your nomination was correct because we all agreed.
Yeah, exactly. But it's reassuring to know that we are getting there, right?
Yeah.
Because I think we do sometimes focus on where we have yet to go versus where we've come from. And clearly, not only where CAMIMH's gone with the campaign and to get to the point where you have Brian involved and other people with great stories, Brian's moving on with his life, and he's making the most of it. And now you're working in peer support, and you've dedicated your life to helping people. And I think that's beyond commendable. So, so thank you very much, both of you, for coming on the podcast. This is Brian's second time on the podcast, so he's our first second guest on the podcast. So appreciate having you both. It's been a great night, and thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
We know the path we walk together begins and ends with hope. Begins and